Hello and welcome to the Face of Pro-Life. Today I'm speaking with Friar Roderick Burke from the Franciscanfriars of the Immaculate. Thank you so much for joining us today, Friar Roderick.
It's good to be here, Corinne.
So you have been doing a little bit of surfing and came across an article in the Bloomberg News.
Right, yeah, a very unusual article from Bloomberg.
So let's talk politics.
All right, yeah, it is a political, has political connotations. The actual article, though, was really about, the title was about the fact that Roe v. Wade was good for U.S. investments. It was on Bloomberg. So to see Roe v. Wade on Bloomberg was very strange, and of course, sure enough,
so that caught your attention, yeah.
And sure enough, they connected it to investments, which of course Bloomberg would do.
Right, because it's like a more financial website.
Right. So Roe v. Wade is where the abortion was legitimized by the Supreme Court and overrode all the state legislative laws throughout the country.
Right.
In one fell swoop.
Right, because Connecticut had a very strong pro-life, anti-abortion law.
Right.
I know I grew up in Michigan. We had just in the November before that passed, reaffirmed that we didn't want abortion in our state. And I think it was only California and New York at the time had the abortion on demand.
Right.
So Roe versus Wade made abortion throughout all of the states legal to the moment of birth.
Right, including the Doe-Bolton ruling, which came along at the same time, same day, same year, and legalized all trimesters, basically.
Right.
For all effects and purposes.
Right, because most people think, when they think of Roe versus Wade, they rightly think that it only legalized abortion through the first trimester. But like you said, the accompanying lawsuit of Doe versus Bolton basically said, abortion on demand for reasons of health, which means really anything, up through 9 months.
Right. So
how is this good for investors?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. They say that, and then they don't really go into the fact that Roe v. Wade is caused 50 million deaths. So it's kind of striking that there was no mention of that. And the fact that they basically mentioned that they're saying that Roe v. Wade was good for America, at least good for investments anyways. They didn't really go into too much the social side of it. But so it's kind of spooky just from that point of view, that they would be so callous about that. But how it's good for investments, as I said, is basically brought in a lot of fiscal conservatives into the government, because the the social conservatives, those who were pro-life, weren't really socially or fiscally conservative. So they weren't for low taxes.
Right.
They weren't for pro-business as much as the fiscal conservatives were.
But it was more along the basically the Republican Party, which was more fiscally conservative, did take the pro-life platform, and so many of the
almost as a side issue. Almost as a side issue.
Right, and so more people that were mobilized by Roe versus Wade, as far as social conservatives, had really nowhere else to go.
Right.
So they kind of went on by default the fiscal conservative bandwagon.
The liberals and the Democrats were definitely pro-life. The fiscal conservatives were also pro-choice, but pro-choice in the sense that we think the states should have the choice.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
they were fine with Connecticut having a pro-life stance and New York having a pro-choice stance.
Right.
They didn't want to get involved in that.
Right.
So they really thought that it was really a states' rights issue.
Yes, right. They didn't want to get involved in that, and probably for principles as far as being freedom and along a libertarian mentality that also includes the economic libertarianism of the pro-business platform. So they either politically astutely put it in the sense of being they're pro-choice but they're against Roe v. Wade, or they did it through principles, but the end result was the pro-lifers all said, okay, we'll join you. And they did. And they were all mobilized because Roe v. Wade so callously overrode so many legislative Democratic initiatives that had been on the books for years and years and years, and just overnight wiped those out, and with Doe Bolton went as far as the third trimester, so right after birth.
Right.
And apparently that was more radical than any other place on the planet, including the very
Russia.
liberal Russia and
Cuba even.
Cuba and Europe. So
Yeah.
all those places you think as being very liberal, more so than the United States, don't have as liberal as laws as the two cases of Roe v. Wade and Doe Bolton. So this really radicalized a very conservative, a socially conservative American voting bloc, and put them all on the side of the fiscal conservatives, and that got through a lot of things that were good for American business as far as a pro-business capitalistic agenda that this article says is visible both in our comparison between the United States and Europe. So Europe has a lot more higher taxes as far as if your income is $200,000 a year, you get taxed at 60% in Europe or whatever, and in the United States like 30. Okay, and prior to the Roe v. Wade, it was also very high in the United States. So they really have a point there that it could be Roe v. Wade that got so many conservatives into the United States presidency and legislature, that brought in a lot of conservative viewpoint issue. The whole people supported a conservative environment that brought in low taxes, was tolerant toward a big disparity in wealth versus poverty, as far as the upper 1% having half the or 30%, I think, of the whole wealth of the United States. So,
well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, and you can see that the transition from, before Ronald Reagan, I don't think any of the Republican presidents you would think were pro-life.
Right. Ronald Reagan made a point. He was the first one.
Right. And then
he's the one who really embraced the.
Since him, all the Republican presidents have been pro-life, and the majority of, like, when the Republicans had the Senate and the House of Representatives, the majority were pro-life as well, and they would not have gotten the majority if pro-lifers hadn't rallied behind them.
Right. And that's true, and I think it has, on the plus side for the pro-lifers, it has been a safe haven for that, and we are sort of guaranteed a speaking platform, basically, for our issue. And of course, the big rallies we have every year with the pro-life rallies, and I'm sure are very big pushers in that regard, because it's the largest protests in D.C. on an ongoing basis.
And the article goes on to say that pro-lifers themselves aren't necessarily fiscal conservatives,
right? But
because the fiscal conservatives have tended to at least give them a seat at the table, whereas the other party has totally drowned every pro-life voice in their party out, that they have gravitated towards them.
Right, and that's so it's been very powerful as far as the effect. According to this article, you can debate the article too. There were some people in the comments that did debate it, and but there it was. It was in Bloomberg, and it was it was done by Edward Conard, and it's from an excerpt from a book called Unintended Consequences, and it's based on the subtitle was, I think, everything you ever knew about economics is wrong. So it's kind of like showing a unique viewpoint. Sure enough, to bring a Roe v. Wade as a reason for our economic success is truly strange. But it's interesting though, because it also shows that the whole liberal movement has lost out completely because of their embracing of Roe v. Wade.
Right.
So by opposing Roe v. Wade at a time when so many people were against it, they have really lost out as far as driving any kind of high taxes to do any kind of wealth redistribution for their social issues, to tax and spend.
Mm-hmm.
So in the whole pro-government mentality, they've shot that by not supporting Roe v. Wade, or not opposing it rather,
Right.
not supporting the pro-lifers, and every other agenda, including the pro-labor, because all jobs were sent overseas, because the pro-business mentality is to say, well, let's give everyone freedom to close down factories, which does help efficiencies out and stuff like that. So it is good for the economy, but of course you have to wonder long term if that's an issue. You know, you could come to the point where if you get in a war with somebody who has all your factories, what do you do? You know, I mean, there is that issue that efficiency is not everything.
Right.
So,
well,
but
I know even
that's not
Jimmy
an issue.
Carter has recently brought up the same type of issue, in that he believes that the Democrats should soften their platform.
In regard to what? Well,
with regard to their adamant pro-abortion stance.
Wow.
And try to have some kind of compromises. And I think he's looking at that same type of issue, that they're losing out on a lot of people who would be very sympathetic to a lot of other things that they stand for, except for the fact that they stand for the killing of 1.2 million children every year.
Right.
And if they had their way, it would be even more.
Right.
But as far as the fiscal conservatives, they have to start thinking, I mean, really about overturning Roe versus Wade, because we're losing our Social Security trust fund. Besides being pilfered from by the politicians and all the money taken out for other programs, there's less money going in because there's less people and more seniors drawing from the fund.
So from a fiscal point of view, if you're a fiscal conservative, you should be pro-life for that for that very, very inescapable mathematical reason that you got to have people to support people. And so if he doesn't still want to support the people when they get old, then boy, you really are going to be in tough shape.
I know, and it makes it even more dire when you look at the fact that we had this big debate recently, is that President Obama, he wanted to decrease the payroll tax. And he gave us all this these payroll tax deductions. It's like, do you realize that is taking money out of Social Security?
Okay. That's funny.
The decreasing your payroll tax means less money going into Social Security. If you have less people working and paying into Social Security, and each person that is working is paying less and less, it's going to go bankrupt a lot sooner than ever predicted.
Right. So there's a lot of interesting things playing out, and all these things kind of come out in the whole pro-life dynamic and the whole upcoming presidential election, because it's all might have how their stances are on these things can really affect, and how they word the thing too. They can say, if they word it correctly and have the right strategies, you can really win a lot of people who you wouldn't think you could win, and including, ironically, the pro-lifers might need to win the hearts of the fiscal conservatives. When we think we already have, we think we have, because the Republicans are always voting pro-life.
Not all of them,
but not all of them. That's a good point. They're not, and whereas all the Democrats are voting pro-choice.
Even the ones who run as pro-life Democrats, once they get elected, like Robert Casey from Pennsylvania, once they're elected, they still vote party line and don't vote pro-life.
Okay.
So we have to be really careful about holding their feet to the fire, because if you're going to run as a pro-life candidate, make sure that those candidates stick to their principles.
Right, and that's the thing. The conservatives do give a pro-life line during the elections, but have they really done a good job at Roe v. Wade to bring that down? Of course, the way you want to get rid of that directly is to bring in the good judges.
Right.
That's one thing that Reagan did not do.
Well, he didn't know. He was duped.
Maybe, okay. But of all the things you shouldn't be duped on, the one thing you should have been watching out for, the one thing you should have been concentrating on that whole issue, if you really do care about it.
Right.
should have been that, and he did,
Right.
and somehow he did not. I'm not sure how or why or what, but nevertheless,
Well,
bottom
he
line
did not
is-
have a litmus test.
right.
He didn't think he had to have a litmus test.
And that's I would say that's a little bit of negligence on his part.
Right.
And that's one of the things the article does say is that there's been very strong fiscal conservatives as far as reducing taxes, which by the way does not mean they reduce deficits.
Sure.
I mean, Reagan had very high deficits, so Bush Senior and Bush Junior. And the only one that's had higher since is Obama, but he's the only Democrat that's had even worse fiscal deficits, which you would think would be opposite of what you would expect from a fiscal conservative.
Mm-hmm.
You'd say better fiscal management, you know,
Right.
but you don't get that. You get low taxes and still high spending, whereas the Democrats bring in high taxes and even higher spending. So it's almost no difference as far as the foreclosing of our future for
Yeah.
the kids, you know.
But I mean, if you are pro-life, I mean, especially with the country's situations now in the government getting more and more involved in healthcare and all these other issues, you really do need to be fiscally conservative and hope that your government is fiscally conservative, because you don't want them involved in a lot of these things. You don't want them dictating, you know, what your doctor is going to do and everything, because once the government is involved,
directly,
then they start, you know, mucking things up. I mean, really, is there any efficient governmental program?
Right. They're inefficient. They're you know, very overly protective as far as all the regulations and stuff and all the hoops you got to jump through to get the services, and many people fall through the cracks, and a lot of money gets wasted, and it's just a very big organization that's always a problem as far as
and yet, you know,
services.
Especially the poor, the disabled, the elderly, they're the ones who are going to suffer the most.
That's right. That's right. So the you know, from the Catholic point of view, you would certainly want to have all that taken care of, but you would not the government to be able to basically set up a system that a framework that makes it all work, that makes it happen on a different basis than just direct government involvement. But
well, I think there should be no government involvement, and the churches should take back their purview.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the ones that should be feeding the poor and
true charity.
Healing the sick.
That's
you
true
know
charity.
that exactly.
And that's where charity gets perverted in that sense. But that's all pretty interesting. But it's interesting that you know, that really, in a sense, the big winners in all this have been the conservatives, and Roe v. Wade has really been, and ironically, been a very big help for them.
Right.
So there's an article is so pro Roe v. Wade is basically saying that the fiscal conservatives actually might not be too interested in seeing Roe v. Wade go away, because it's been so helpful at bringing all this stuff in, pushing forward their agenda. So how helpful are they going to be in the long term when it's been so helpful for that to be around as an issue to get people on their side that would not be on their side?
Well, if they
and really the fiscal conservatives are really so pro-rich, and so and again, they aren't really for the underdog and the voiceless victim that the unborn is. It's not really their thing, you know. So you can't really, even from the get-go, you can't see them being too much for the pro-life issue, you know, on that basis. You know, you can say is on the pro-family basis, they would you can see them doing that, you know, because the family is sort of akin to you know, the business as far as being very you know, you need families.
The stronger families you have,
right.
you know, the society grows and prospers
better
much
economy.
better. Yeah.
Right. So on that basis, you would want that, but you
Right.
can also see that they aren't really the big underdog champions that the Democrats have made themselves out to
Pretend to be.
Right. Yeah. Pretend. Fair enough.
Oh yeah, I mean,
So-
really, of all the little people, you know, the babies are the littlest, you know.
Right.
They're
So
the ones that we should all be championing.
the point is, it's not to say that conservatives are bad, and the point is not to say that you know, the liberals are hopeless. The point is to say that the conservatives can be on our side. We have to sort of pitch it the right way and point out that for Social Security points we have to have strong pro-family and pro-life mentalities, but also for the economy as far as if they do tend to put the economy above people, then even then you still want strong families and strong birth rates, and then you also for the liberals, there's plenty of things that the pro-lifers can put out that are very much aligned with liberals. You are talking about voiceless victims who are the smallest, and the real underdogs that the Democrats and the social liberals are very interested in helping out. There are a lot of people who want to help out poor mothers and all the pro-life things that say birthright or the are doing. And they're also the pro-choice thing is made to be as pro-woman thing, but as we know and talked about on this program, it's not really all the time. It's a lot of times
abortion
it's just
is not good for women.
Right. It's just a way to push women around and say, look, let's do this wrong thing, and because it's get an abortion afterwards, or don't bother me about this problem you have. I'll pay for your abortion. All these things are just fuel the all the problems with social the sexual revolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not that good for women.
No, it has not been good for women whatsoever.
So even on that basis, you have to say that the liberals could really side with the pro-life movement.
So what are we to do?
Well, I think
just keep the dialogue going.
Yeah, I think it's two things. One, we need to sort of keep the heat on those who are supposedly on our side, which is the fiscal conservatives, the Republican Party. Keep the heat on them. They say they're pro-life.
Some of them do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and even those who do, are they? In other words, maybe they are. But let's get some results.
Right.
Let's get some judges in there that are pretty good. I thought George Bush Jr. did a good job of getting some good ones in there.
He did. He did.
So that was pretty good. I mean, Erwin bashes poor George.
Well, he was not necessarily a fiscal conservative.
No, that's true. As far as certainly he spent a lot of money. He may have, or certainly got us a lot of debt.
Yeah, I mean, he did have a couple of wars that he was fighting and all, but still, he could have done some precision cutting and and I mean, even in the GSA.
Things didn't go so well under his tenure there. That's for sure. But that might have been his fault entirely. But the certainly we mentioned Reagan did not get that the good judge in that he could have gotten in that would turn the balance.
Yeah.
Was it Sarah Connor? Or is it?
No, it was Sandra Day O'Connor.
Oh, okay, Sandra Day O'Connor.
Yeah, she was the first woman, and she was not pro-life.
Okay. And
but he never asked.
Right. Oops.
That was his oversight.
So and then the other one would be to have a sort of social angle to the pro-life appeals, and that would warm up. So it's like put the heat on the conservatives and put the and try and warm up the liberals to our side. As far as holding the conservatives' feet to the fire.
And there have been a lot of pro-life Democrats that have been elected, but they have been bullied out of voting their conscience, and we need to help them, to be able to stand up and be able to vote their conscience, because that's really sad, and to think that somebody would have to vote against their conscience just to please the party.
Right.
Hacks.
Right. That is bad, and it's you see more and more of that, of course, with the contraception thing with Obama and the Catholic Church. But another thing they can do, as far as being the liberals on our side, is more. Say, I'm not sure how far I can go with this, obviously, because it's such a deep thing in the Democratic Party is anti-life mentality. It's really a religion for them, it seems. But anyways, you can go at least as far as to say, look, Roe v. Wade's been a disaster for all your other agendas you're supposed to be for, and that is more distribution of wealth and bigger government and all these other agendas that there's whole social programs in the government are being hurt by these low taxes. So if you can show them that they've lost all of that just to support the pro-life, pro-choice movement, then maybe they ought to can that and or back off from that to some extent, anyways, and be more pro-life, or at least not be so staunchly anti-life.
Oh, I know.
And then appeal to the average liberal, average
or independent.
Independent, yeah, and those who are not for the capitalism and the pro-business mentality. Be that right or wrong. I'm not trying to say that that either one's right or wrong, but I'm just saying that there are people who are against the pro-business mentality, as we know with all the Occupy movement and everything like that. It's getting very, very radical in a lot of ways. But even they should see that all their agendas, as far as the social agendas, getting more money from the rich and distributing to the poor through these social programs in the government. That's all being shot down by their strong pro-life movement, pro-choice movement, right? Their anti-pro-life movement, right? They're pro Roe v. Wade,
right.
And holding that up, and so that's, and the Republicans being for shooting that down, the Roe v. Wade, they've actually overturned what's been unstoppable throughout the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's true. And they've also been able to make some inroads, and mostly because of pro-life helping them get into office, but make inroads in individual states.
Right.
As far as softening some of the the staunch pro-abortion laws, and that there are more. Like some of these ultrasound bills, or some of the bills that regulate abortion clinics, because a lot of people don't understand that the average abortion clinic isn't regulated like all the other health clinics.
Right,
so
right.
it's really
it's another social issue, right?
Right.
And the fact that a lot of pro-life a lot of the clinics don't crack down on child pornography and stuff.
True. A lot of things. Ugh, you brought up a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Too bad we don't have more time to talk
Right.
about this. But thank you for joining us today.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you've learned something. Talk to your family and friends about your pro-life views. Win them over. And when you look in the mirror the next time, you realize yours too is the face of pro-life. Please join us again next time.